Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is Gregory A. Lacey's Family Memories, 1995. This was originally published as Zuck Family Memories Collection, or ZFMC 53, published on August 10th, 1989. Greg Lacey is the son of Steve Lacey, who was the son of Helen Zuck Lacey, who was the sister of Gertrude Zuck Ray, my father's mother. So Greg and I, our grandmothers were sisters, and so Greg's my cousin. And I interviewed him on April 9th, 1995, in Rocky River, Ohio, during a visit that my wife Alice, our son Tim, and I made from the Philippines to the United States to Rocky River, Ohio, my parents' home, and Greg came to visit, so that was nice. Today is Sunday, April 9th, 1995. We are in Rocky River, Ohio. With us today is Greg Lacey. Is it Gregory Zuck Lacey? Greg. Gregory Allen Lacey. Peter Ray. Who has Zuck as a middle name? Is that John? Greg. My dad, Stephen Zuck Lacey. Peter J. Ray. So Greg came to visit, which was very nice, Greg. Yeah, I had a wonderful visit with Peter and Alice and their son, Timmy, who is 2.5 years old. He's a wonderful kid, has a great disposition, loves to have fun, loves to run around. Ha ha ha. He's a lot of fun. We got along pretty well. Yeah, Greg and Tim really bonded together almost immediately. I think he's fallen asleep now. Yeah, he's a good kid. It was great that Greg came because we're only in the United States once a year. You flew over. Otherwise, we can't connect. Right. Well, maybe someday I'll get to the Philippines. Maybe we'll make it to Lakeside. It will be nice to get there again. I haven't been there since 1989. We went last year. It had been a few years. Lakeside has dwindled down a little bit, I think. It's only your parents, John and Ruth Ray. The Laceys. Even though last year we had a big dinner with George Ann, Marshall, and Katie, their children, and their children's children. Peter Ray. Was it 2 years ago that we had a big year? Greg. 2 years ago. It's been a few years. It's been a while. Michael Ray was there this year, too. Was it 2 years ago I made the ZFMC with all the people talking? Harold and Marge? Were Harold and Marge there 2 years ago? Yes, 2 years ago. No, I remember. So that was a big year. Usually it alternates. 1 year is big, the next year is small. Lenore is always there, and Seal. This past year, only myself, John, my brother John, Lisa, Chris, my mom Connie, John and Ruth Ray, and Seal and Lenore stayed over. We had the big dinner when the Sandusky Zucks came over. Those are all Zucks. Their last name is Zuck. Yeah, even though they don't get into the week-long lakeside scene. Well, their kids are young, 4 or 5, 7 or 8. It's too bad. We used to go there when we were kids. The Lacey family started to go when I was 10 or 11. But you've been diehard since then. Pretty much. Chris has been going since he was 4 or 5. He used to always be the youngest guy there. I think he abused that. Ha ha ha. He was the youngest of everybody that was there. You, me, and Mike always stuck together. John and Chris were always trying to catch up. Tagging along, right. They got to be the butt of some practical jokes, I think. Well, yes, the 5 of us, we had a nice little group. Patricia was there. She was only a year or 2 older than us. Kathy and Lisa Wiesenauer came 1 or 2 times, and then they kind of dropped out. Michael and Tracy Ray came. Peter, Ray, the 3 Lacey boys for quite some time. Most of the 1970s into the 1980s. Were Tracy and Patty with us? Was that the name of... What was the name of that one house? The Bags. We were all up on the 3rd floor. The girls on one side and the guys on the other side. All of the pillow fights came out of that room. Would the girls come with us to shuffleboard on the route we would take? Yeah, they came along. I remember it more being just guys. That's the memory I have. Right. I remember them coming along a couple times. You're probably right. It was mostly guys. We'd go to the candle shop, the dock shop, the patio, all those places. It was always a big deal to go to the candle shop. It was probably only 5 blocks away, but for us it was a big deal. Did you ever buy candles? Oh yeah, I used to buy candles all the time. There used to be the ultimate candle. It was like red, white, and blue. The eagle. It was like, oh wow, it was $10 or something. Is that candle store still there? No. Did you look for it? We've looked for it in the past. It's not there. It's not where it used to be. Lakeside is new. They keep changing the putt-putt course every year. Change the holes a little bit, so we always remember them as the old holes. The barn with the closing doors. The lighthouse is gone. I know the 18th hole is Rocky Raccoon. It used to be the clown face. In the shuffleboard, they have some new courts. When we were there, we still did the same things, played putt-putt, shuffleboard, go to the movies, go to the Hoover Auditorium, go out on the dock, and take walks. So even though you're not a little kid anymore, you can be a little kid. Yeah, this past time we almost went sailing again. Patty was there, but the weather was too rough for us to go out. It was too bad. Patty was all set to go out. We played tennis. We still played tennis. We do all the things we used to do. There are no kids there. It's unfortunate. It would be nice to see families. You're one of the first to have children. Maybe we'll see more in the future. The next generation, when are they going to arrive? It's a credit to your mom and dad because they keep Lakeside going. That's a lot of work. Well, I think my dad enjoys it more than anyone. He takes the whole week off. I've always enjoyed going to Lakeside because it's very relaxing, very peaceful. Meeting with family, just sitting on the porch swing or the bird cage, talking with people, catching up with what's happening in the past year. There's always something new, some new story from the past. It's marvelous. I feel restored afterwards. You get new life. I've always enjoyed Lakeside. I sleep better there. Wake up by the chimes. The bells wake you up. It's a wonderful place. There's no television. There's no telephone to speak of. It's good to get away from it all and relax and take a lot of nice walks. Bicycles. Lakeside's kind of small to ride a bicycle around. Did you get out to the islands? No, not this last time. I did play golf with your dad. Over in Bay Point? Yeah. John and I and your dad played golf. That was a nice day. Mark played too, I think. Why don't we talk about Helen for a little while? Helen Zuck Lacey, your grandmother. My grandmother. It's been 5 years since she died already. Helen Lacey. I always have a very good memory of her. She was always very interested in the kids. She traveled a lot in her older years, in her 60s, 70s, and 80s. She went all over. She'd always come back with different things for the kids. She'd save them until we visited. She lived in Oberlin, Ohio most of the time I knew her. We'd visit her every summer, drive to Oberlin. She had that wonderful house, a big house. Some of the college students would stay with her during the year. She'd always have stories about them. She always had something going wherever she was. When she was in Morocco, North Africa, she brought back these wooden camels. They were beautiful carvings. When she was in Florence, Italy, she brought back this leather stuff and gold. She always brought back things for the boys. She always did her artwork, too. She always had a lot of art she'd show us. In that house in Oberlin, the house was totally covered with her artwork. Remember all those enamels? Up the staircase was all these beautiful paintings. Artwork on display all over. Many people would come visit her and buy paintings. She lived there for many years and was happy. John, Chris, and I, when we were 10 years old, we'd spend a month there in the summer. She took care of us for a month. So when you hit 10, you'd spend the summer? Out there, yeah. We all did the same thing. So that was Helen's idea. Why not? That was my first airplane flight. I was 10 years old. Got on an airplane in New York to fly to Cleveland. I was scared to death. Ha ha ha. I flew alone. She'd be waiting at the other end. She would come with her friends. She had lots of friends who would drive her around. She never drove, of course. She had lots of friends who would constantly drive her around. I remember her one neighbor next to us. I forget the name. They had a daughter who was mentally retarded. I used to play with her all the time. We were good friends. Friends always drove Helen to town. She had such a social life. Brunch down at the Oberlin Inn. That summer that I stayed there, we went to Blossom Music Center for an outdoor concert. We would go to some art shows. Then I learned how to enamel. She taught me painting, nothing major. One time there was a big storm with tornadoes. The sky was real black. We did a painting the next day of the whole sky. She helped me do an oil painting. Do you still have that painting? I think it's at my parents' house. I'm sure it's still there. On the wall? No, ha 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 ha. I wasn't good enough to make it on the wall. It's upstairs in the attic. My mom loves to keep stuff. How long did Helen spend in Florence, Italy? Well, she loved Italy. It was a long time. Several of her trips were for months. She spent a lot of time in Spain. She went to Israel when she was like 86. It wasn't a cruise ship or anything. She and her friends. She always had a couple of friends. Israel, Turkey, Spain, Italy, Morocco. She loved Morocco. She had lots of pictures with the little kids. She'd always have trinkets for the kids. They'd always come up to her. Switzerland. Many of her paintings were done over there. She did a lot of paintings and drawings in Turkey. She took a sketchbook along, and when she got home, she'd paint them. Did she write poetry? No, not that I know of. She played the piano for many years. She didn't start painting until she was in her 60s. She was more of a musician when she was younger. Right. She played a lot with her husband, John. She would play and he would sing. He had a wonderful tenor voice. We have a recording of them. As a matter of fact, my parents still have that, a 78 recording. We put it on a cassette and played it at Helen's funeral. Did Helen tell you anything about John, her husband? Yeah, we would ask her. She would talk about him. Oh, sure. She was certainly in love with him. She loved him, and he was very generous. He worked a lot. I asked my dad about his memories of him. When John died, Steve was 20 or 21. He worked a lot and had a lot of stress. They threw these big parties all the time. Ruth Ray, that's what John remembers. They had big socials. Greg, big socials. Ruth Ray, and musicals. When I first met them, they entertained beautifully. Peter, Mom, I'm interviewing Greg. Greg, ha ha ha. That's right. That's what I remember. She would tell me about them. They would have local musicians, or from out of town. They would entertain them after their show in Marion, Ohio. They were traveling through, and whatever the case was, they'd put on these big parties. My dad remembered those. Was John fairly quiet? Yes, he was quiet. He was not the boisterous type. Do you have a really strong understanding of his personality? Well, he died 6 years before I was born. I never knew him. I've seen pictures. That's about it. Has your dad told you much about him? Well, I guess that's why you get that impression, because there aren't a lot of stories about him. There are more stories about what he and Helen did together than individual stories. We have a number of relatives who are like that. Dick Ray was very quiet. Doran Ray, my grandfather, was very quiet. Greg, my dad's quiet. It's nice to try to figure out what they were like. John Lacey did a lot for the community. He was the vice president of this steel company. Ruth Ray, Marion Steam and Shovel. Greg, yes, right. It was in Marion. They did a lot for the community. That's my understanding. That's my impression. My grandmother was always very good at making the best of everything. Helen should have been in public relations. Greg, she should have been. Everything always looked rosy to her. She always was in a good mood when I visited her, even when she left Oberlin and was in the retirement home in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. She loved to see us. She always wanted us to come down and visit. She would still try to cook. She was a wonderful cook. That's where my dad got his cooking from. She loved to entertain. A real hostess. We would go to Doylestown and she would entertain us, take us out. She always wanted to know what we were doing. She would tell us about her life. She always had these friends. One lady was from Yap in Micronesia, and she had moved to the United States. She found these fascinating people who oftentimes were from overseas. She would know them from art or music. She met them going to the opera or something like that. This one woman we met still had the Austrian-German accent. She was really nice. She spent a lot of time with my grandmother. She loved it over there. So Helen was able to meet people easily. Yes, she was very social, very outgoing. bump into somebody and start talking. I think you had to be. She was traveling on her own a lot in her 60s and 70s. She had to rely on other people to get around. She never had a problem with that. Of course, she sometimes expected too much from people. Most people didn't mind. She was very pleasant, good company. She had lots of stories of her experiences traveling around the world. Did you see the sad side of Helen? She was sad when she left Oberlin. She loved Oberlin. Going to Doylestown was sad for her. Did she regret that? I don't think she regretted it. She just didn't want to go. But did she make friends in Doylestown? Oh, yeah, it was a very nice community. She was able to make a home there? Right. Doylestown is very arts-centered, so I think she enjoyed that too. I think that's where James Michener is from, isn't it? Is he? I don't know. So she met these friends, and she was close to her son, Frederick. She was close to her grandchildren, Bill and Liz. She got to see them quite often, so I think that helped. Did they visit her a lot? Yes, they visited her quite often. Now she lost her sight, right? Yes, about the last year. That was amazing. She died at age 93. Up to about a year before that, she was pretty fine. She still walked around, a little slow, but she was doing pretty well. Then her eyes failed and she went down pretty fast. That was her world. Her world was really visual. Without being able to see, it was very difficult. Did you visit her when she was blind? As a matter of fact, my dad and I went down to see her just a few weeks before she died. Was she bedridden? Yes, she was in a wheelchair. We wheeled her down to one of these rooms where this guy was playing the piano. She loved that. She was drifting in and out of sleep. It was very difficult for her not being able to see. That hurt a lot. It was just a few weeks after we were down there that she died. We had this feeling that maybe we should go see her. We had the memorial service in Marion, Ohio. That was a very interesting trip because the whole family went. After the service, Dad drove us around Marion. We went to the streets where the whole Zuck clan was, Windsor Street. We saw the houses. We saw the house where John and Helen lived, where my dad grew up. He showed us that. We were walking around in the yard. Ha, ha, ha. We saw all the old houses. How long since you've been in Marion? Since you'd been in Marion? That was my first time. I'd never been there before. You're kidding. So all the years you went to Lakeside, you never drove down to Marion? No, that was my first time. Helen was buried next to Thomas Felton Zuck. We saw many of the old stones. What was unfortunate is that John Lacey, being Catholic, he was buried in the Catholic cemetery, and Helen was not. He was with his parents. Shall we move on to Gertrude, or do you have other things about Helen? Well, I'm sure they'll come out. Gertrude and Helen were so close, they were a couple. I remember at Lakeside, those two were always together, especially after Doran died. They were a pair, those two. You could tell they were sisters. I was always amazed how they would always call you by your full name, like Christopher or Gregory. Gertrude and Doran. I was never Greg. Of course, John was John. That's the way we were addressed. Maybe that was the old way. I can still picture Gertrude and Helen walking down to the dock. They would talk about the old times. Ha ha. Gertrude was similar. She was very positive, always rather upbeat, always glad to see you and sit and talk with you. Do you remember her and Helen sitting on the bench by the 9th hole at putt-putt? Oh, yeah. They waited for us. We'd tell them our score for the first 9. Yes, they would wait for us. They always wanted to watch. They'd come watch the shuffleboard, too. You said they were similar. I always thought they were different. Yeah, why? Helen was entertaining, artistic, and very outgoing. Gertrude was more reserved. In terms of clothing, Gertrude wore more gray and was much more conservative. Helen was really liberal, and I think Gertrude was conservative. Helen was much more expressive and physical. Did she hug you a lot? Yes, oh yes. Gertrude wasn't like that. She had it in her eyes. You could see it in her face, the twinkle and the love, but it wasn't expressed physically. She seemed to control her emotions more. Now Helen was my grandmother and Gertrude was not. I thought they were similar in the way they talked. She would say, "Come sit down next to me and tell me what's going on." Those kinds of things. Helen would be the same, but you're right. I remember at Helen's 90th birthday, I don't know if you were there then, she had this really gold and red outfit.
Ha 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 ha. Gertrude would never wear something like that.
Yeah, you're right. That's true. That seems to be the artistic type. It goes back to Helen being so visual. Visual things were what drove her, what inspired her.
My parents gave Gertrude and Doran some money to travel or whatever. They bought a washer and dryer with it.
Ha 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 ha.
Gertrude didn't travel much. I don't think she left the United States. They went to Yellowstone Park when she was young. She was really the stay-at-home housewife. With Helen, the world was her home.
Yeah, she loved to travel. Maybe because that's how she grew up. She was so tied to the home. She really didn't get out of the house till her late 20s.
Well, with Gertrude, in a sense, her life kind of ended when Doran died. But she was in her 70s when he died. It was okay for her to slow down. But Helen became a widow when she was about 50, right? That was really too young for her life to be over.
That's when she started to travel and the artwork. Before that, she was the entertainer, the hostess, the mother.
But even in Marion, when they were in their 30s and 40s, Gertrude didn't have the parties that Helen had.
Helen liked to live life to the fullest, no doubt about it.
The Glen Lake deal.
Right, all those things. That was her way of enjoying life and expressing her love for life. Her sense of worth and well-being was in seeing nature and God in nature, those kinds of things. That really inspired her and drove her. To see nature and express it in painting, through the enamels and the artwork. Even in her cooking, it was artistic. You got a plate that looked beautiful, you know? It was artistically laid out.
When you spent time with Helen, did you feel good? Did you get this warm feeling?
Yeah.
Did she ever give you a hard time about anything?
Well, she always expected you to do the best, whether that was really best for you or not. Maybe not.
Did she want you to study music in college?
Well, she thought it would have been nice. Yeah, those kinds of things.
You should study music. You should be an artist. You should do this. Not a math major.
Right. Ha ha. Well, I have that conflict with my personality. I have this one side that's math and numbers, and I have another side that's the artistic side, music.
So you think you did get some of Helen's and your father's music?
I still play cello in a cello trio, and I play the guitar. I've never tried the art side of it. I have this rational side and then this artistic side.
Do you think everybody has that some people don't develop one side?
No, I think some people have more than others. The simple things in life. This is reality and deal with it. Maybe that was fine for them. They were happy with that, but Helen had to be out doing things, doing her artwork, and expressing herself, showing her emotions.
Do you think Helen had really high expectations about life that were unfulfilled, that she was constantly disappointed about things?
Yeah, she had these expectations about her sons and grandchildren, that we ought to be this, that, and the other thing.
And they didn't do that?
Not in her eyes, no.
But how about herself? She was sort of like grasping for the stars, and you just couldn't get them.
Well, I don't know about that. I think she wanted more for her sons.
So even though she had such a full life for herself, the lives of her sons and grandchildren were really important to her.
Oh, I certainly think there were things about her life she was disappointed about.
Like losing Glen Lake.
Right.
She kept that into the 1960s, I think, and John died.
In 1954. Selling Glen Lake was a big disappointment for Helen. I know she regretted some things. Some of her paintings she wished she hadn't sold, should have kept in the family. That was interesting. The artwork was how she made her money, but at the same time she didn't want to part with it because that was a piece of her, something she created that she wanted to pass on to her sons and grandchildren. But she had to sell it.
So she was a professional artist?
Well, she had Social Security, but that was certainly part of her income. In Oberlin, she did the boarding, she had the students. A lot of her art she sold to friends. And there's a lot throughout the family. I have some, John has some, Chris has some, my dad has some, Carol and Dave have some.
Do you remember much about Barb and Bill Smith?
A little bit. I remember Bill and his pipe. They were the real socialites, too. They went to the operas and the plays, and they were always talking about it.
Intellectual.
Very intellectual.
They probably hit it off with Helen.
Yes, they did. As a matter of fact, they would come up quite often.
They did things together, that's true. They'd get into this big intellectual discussion, and for Helen and enjoy the show, ha ha ha. She would look at the beauty of something, the grandeur of some play. They would say, what does it mean? Ha ha ha. She loved the arts. Do you think Helen's life was too much artistic and not balanced enough? Oh yeah, because she would be unrealistic about things, and money was one of them. There's the point of how do you manage your money. That was not a strong point with her, and it was obviously difficult for her to do on her own, and her expectations. Why don't you come visit more often? And we had jobs and careers. It's great to have her artwork to remember, Helen. Many people's lives pass on, and there's nothing. Which other people do you have the strongest memories of from Lakeside? I think Bill and Barbara. They tended to fight a lot. They would disagree about books or something. Who else? I remember your dad always. Your dad has his different noise-making abilities. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. And when you're a kid, that's the greatest thing. The other adults would cringe, but the kids loved it. I remember those. Those were some funny times. His name's like Nagelt for Mike. He would always have that cigar, and they would have those poker games. You could hear his voice halfway across Lakeside. I thought it was Harold Freilich that had that booming voice. Did Harold too? Is that a Zuck trait? Might be. But your dad doesn't speak loudly. No. How about Helen? Loud voice? No. Both of Helen's sons were artistic. John was an English professor. My dad was a music teacher. They may be quiet, but in writing or music, that's when the emotions come out. I think Patty's like that. Music is really important for her. It's certainly one way to express yourself. Music is big for me. I love to play the cello and the guitar, and it's a release. It's a way of expressing yourself. Could you talk with Helen and your dad about music and what it feels like and what it means? Could you relate to each other on that level? Oh yeah, oh certainly. We could always talk about music. Growing up, Sunday mornings we'd go to church and come back. My dad would be making something in the kitchen. You could smell the turkey or the chicken or the ham, and there would always be classical music playing. Sunday afternoon and Sunday dinner. That was every Sunday. That's where I got the appreciation for classical music. Classical music can bring out emotions and feelings. It moves me very much. To tears? Sometimes. Not only tears of sadness. The Hallelujah chorus from Messiah. That can still move me. Tears of joy. That's not sad at all. Do you talk to Patty about music? No, not that much. I'd like to see her sometime. I'm sure she's in a fine orchestra. I played the trombone, but it never got to me. It was just something I did. Right, like a hobby or something. It's what everyone did, you know. Mark played violin, Pam cello, and Patty viola. The cello is a very expressive instrument. Well, you don't remember Pam that much. You couldn't relate to her about the cello. You were two cellists. It's kind of like me and Barb and Bill. They were teachers, bookworms, and that's what I am now. But they died before I got into it. I'd like to talk with them now, but I can't. That's the way it is. Any other things you want to talk about? Thanks for the opportunity. It's good to remember. You're a good interviewee because you have a lot of thoughts that are not boring. Ha ha ha. You get some people on tape and it's like, okay, you're putting us to sleep now. Let's try to get a little more exciting. It's good to talk about because you forget a lot if you don't write them down. You asked some good questions, and that made me think. 10 years from now, your way of thinking will be different. Do you want to talk about where you are in your life right now with your career crisis? Well, I'm trying to figure out what I want to do. I'm not sure yet. I've thought a lot about teaching. You'd like to get into more human service. Yeah, that's exactly it. Working with people in the sense of helping them, teaching them, counseling them, something along those lines, rather than computers. Well, it's just that with a big company, IBM, there's a lot of political stuff. You have to do things. You have to follow the rules. And there are times when you don't deal with people at all. I don't like that. I like dealing with people. It's hard, but you get so much out of it. What I'm doing now has no true meaning. You don't feel connected to people? I don't feel connected to people. I don't feel like I'm doing anything that's of value to humanity.
In the big picture, does it have value? I don't think so.
Do you want to teach music? Has your father encouraged you to teach music?
No, I would be a math teacher if anything. Music is something I enjoy. I wouldn't want to make it a job. Ha ha ha.
You don't want to spoil it.
Right, I don't know yet. It'll be interesting to see. You'll have to interview me in 5 years and see where I am.
Do you feel like you're going to make a move pretty soon?
Well, if I do anything, I'll probably have to go back to school. So it'll be a matter of going to school for a few years first.
While still working for IBM?
I imagine.
Night school, weekends?
Right.
Would IBM let you shorten your hours to go to school?
No, unless it's job related, no.
Do you feel that IBM is like this big monster and you're an insignificant cog?
Yeah, exactly. You feel like you're this little piece. Although I certainly have influence with the people I manage, but it's still overall directed by what goes on from above. It's not that I want to do things on my own, it's just so impersonal. I don't see the relevance of it. I don't come home and say, I really accomplished something today, something that's going to make a difference.
Do you want to talk about yourself other than your career?
No, not at this time. It'll take too long.
Well, thanks, Greg. This was really good.
I'm glad too. Thanks, Peter.
It may be a few years before it's printed.
Ha, that's all right.
But that will make it more interesting. Did I say that? Patty read hers and said, I thought it was pretty good. It was her second one, so thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming to Cleveland. I was telling Tim, well, Uncle Greg's leaving and maybe you'll see him next year. It was really nice you came.
Yeah, thank you.
So that concludes today's presentation, Gregory A. Lacey's Family Memories, 1995. Good luck to you with your efforts in family history if this interests you, finding, preserving, and sharing old letters, diaries, and photographs, and interviewing elderly relatives while they're alive. You might consider checking out our website, Adventures in History with Peter J. Ray at peterjray.com. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.